over 10 years, George W. Bush was inaugurated as president after a contentious battle over votes, chads, in the Electoral College. Many have called for the system to be changed and the Electoral College to be eliminated or altered. That is being discussed right now at the state capitol, and with us today, representing both sides, State Representative Andrew Fleischman, Democrat of West Hartford, and State Representative David Labriola, Republican of Oxford. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks for having us.
This is not an easy process. Why don't we start with you, Representative Fleischman, explain what needs to be done to get it changed.
Well, it's really, in some sense, not complicated at all.
But Connecticut doesn't have the final say. It's an amendment, right? Or
what we would do is we would enter into an interstate compact, okay. But the net result would be this. 70% of Americans, over 74% of Connecticut residents, would like to see the person who gets the most votes in running for president to be elected president on election day. The person who has the greatest national tally becomes president. And that's not our system now, and there's a simple interstate compact that would make that happen.
Why are we doing this?
We shouldn't do it. We have a budget crisis in Connecticut, but there's no crisis about the Electoral College. It served our nation very well for more than 200 years, and there's no good reason to change it. We are a nation of states, a republic, as reflected by our United States Senate, where every state, regardless of its size, has 2 U.S. senators. It protects small states like Connecticut. The Electoral College is based on the same formula. The amount of votes that a state has in the Electoral College, it depends on how many congressional seats they have. So the Electoral College protects small states like Connecticut.
But as I understand it, though, the candidates would spend more time here if our electoral votes weren't as important.
Absolutely. In fact, small states like us are really given a raw deal under the Electoral College. 35 states in the Union were basically ignored by the 2 major presidential candidates in 2008. That's because they weren't considered swing states or battleground states. So whether you're Connecticut or California or Texas, because you're not in play, you're a flyover state. The presidential candidates don't visit. They don't spend a dime on radio or television. You don't get to hear the actual debate between the candidates. So it ill serves our democracy. And the U.S. Constitution gives state legislatures the power to decide how their electors will vote. So we're just using that power to make Connecticut and all states more relevant, because it'll be one person, one vote. There will not be states flown over under the system.
But to play devil's advocate, aren't they still going to go to the battleground states? I mean, Connecticut's a blue state, hasn't voted Republican in I don't know how many years, right? I mean,
well, we actually voted Republican in 1988. Connecticut voted for Bush against Dukakis, and in the last 50 years, many Republican candidates for president have won. So we have been swing states, and we will be again. Even in 2008, after the Republican convention, when Sarah Palin was selected, around Labor Day in Connecticut, McCain was winning in the polls in Connecticut. It was only afterwards that the Palin candidacy imploded and Obama won Connecticut easily. So it's often competitive in Connecticut, and it will be again. If this passed, Connecticut would be a flyover. Perhaps a couple candidates would swoop into Bridgeport or New Haven, the urban centers, and that's how it would be in the whole nation. It would be, the candidates would go into the population centers, the cities, and the rest, the bulk of Connecticut would be totally ignored.
How is this? I just have to respond to a couple points there, because first of all, currently all of us are ignored. In fact, in 2008, Connecticut was the nation's most ignored state, according to Fair Vote. That's number one. Number two, in terms of what would change. So we're in the Northeast Corridor. You can remember there used to be these whistle-stop campaigns where somebody would go ahead and get on the train in New York and go up to Boston, because there are millions of voters between New York and Boston. That hasn't happened in 50 years because we haven't been in play. Under this system, people would certainly want to do things like that, because there are so many voters in this region that even though the state as a whole might not be in play, there are a lot of independent voters and swing voters to be found in every stop along that railway route.
We are more ignored than a North Dakota or an Alaska or Hawaii?
Number 1 most ignored state in 2008. And by the way, even if we weren't number 1, it would still be a lousy system, because it should be presidential candidates going to where the voters are, not just going constantly to Ohio and ignoring California, New York, Connecticut.
Let's talk about the chances of this passing or failing. What are you looking at in terms of the vote totals right now? Let's begin with you.
I would say it's pretty close, and so I would urge the viewers to think about this. There's going to be a public hearing on this topic, and the GAE committee, both Andy and I serve on, and you know, make up your own minds. But remember, Dennis, this is what we're talking about. In 2004, John Kerry defeated George Bush in Connecticut. He won easily. Under this proposal, the Connecticut electors would have to have voted for George Bush, who won the national popular vote. So how undemocratic is that? Even though Connecticut voted overwhelmingly for John Kerry, their votes would go to George Bush. Look how a small state would be so diluted by this process. The Electoral College protects a state like Connecticut.
Let's say it passes. What's next? What's the next step after that?
We got to get some other states to pass it. We're about 30% of the way to having enough states on board with this compact for it to take effect. But I just want to come back to 2004. If you had just shifted around 59,000 votes in Ohio in 2004, John Kerry would have been elected president, even though he lost the national vote by 3.5 million votes. How undemocratic would that have been? That's what our Electoral College does. What this system says is, hey, the person who gets the most votes in this country and who represents this country on the world stage is our president.
And just a final seconds, what's the time frame in terms of best case scenario for this passing? How many years away?
Hard to say because it's a multi-state process, but we proponents are doing our best to try and get states in place for 2012.
That early, all right. State Representative Andrew Fleischman from West Hartford, David Labriola, State Representative from Oxford, thank you so much for being with us, and keep us posted on how that goes.